About 15 buildings here have been abandoned for quite some time. They did a lot of searching for the kids here.
Specifically for Jennifer and I believe Holly Ann.
Growing up on Staten Island, Barbara and I had often heard the legend of Cropsy.
You're supposed to have a hook and axe with a knife about this big.
Cropsy was the escaped mental patient who lived in the tunnels beneath the old abandoned Willowbrook Mental Institution, who would come out late at night, snatch children off the streets.
I would have never guessed about the amount of weirdos living on Staten Island.
There might be somebody on your block. It might be somebody you work with.
You know, here's this guy going around picking off these kids.
The legend of Cropsy began as a campfire tale on Staten Island, often told to scare children into behaving. The story warned of a boogeyman named Cropsy, a deranged escaped mental patient who roamed the abandoned grounds of the old Willowbrook State School, searching for children to abduct. According to the legend, Cropsy would lurk in the shadows, waiting to snatch up unsuspecting kids and drag them into the tunnels beneath the school, never to be seen again. For years, Cropsy was just that, a terrifying story, a fictional figure that parents used to keep their children in line. But as it turned out, the legend of Cropsy wasn't entirely fiction. The line between myth and reality blurred in the 1970s and 1980s when children began disappearing on Staten Island, and the people of the area started to wonder if there was some truth to the urban legend. In 1987, the urban legend took a horrifying turn when a man named Andre Rand was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome. Rand had worked as a custodian at the Willowbrook State School, which had been closed in 1987 following an expose that revealed horrific conditions and abuse of the people there. Rand was known to live a transient lifestyle, often setting up camp near the abandoned school where he was seen as a menacing figure by the local community. The police search for Jennifer Schweiger led them to the old Willowbrook grounds, where her body was eventually discovered in a shallow grave. The connection to the Cropsey legend was undeniable at this point. Rand's arrest and subsequent conviction sent shockwaves through Staten Island, as many began to realize that the boogeyman they had feared as children might have been real all along. Further investigations into Andre Rand's life revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior. He had been linked to several other disappearances, all involving children who were vulnerable or had disabilities. While Rand was only convicted for the kidnapping and murder of Jennifer Schweiger, many believe he was responsible for more of the unsolved disappearances on Staten Island.
Guilty on all counts after police say he stole from about 1,000 homes and camps. 47-year-old Christopher Knight pleaded guilty to just 6 different instances, facing 13 counts total. But with hundreds of victims, there are a wide range of opinions on just how the so-called North Pond Hermit should be punished.
Some wanted him out on April 5th. Others want him to be in prison for years. So there's really quite a range.
Knight still doesn't have a release date, but he has been told he'll have to serve a 7-month sentence. And because he has already been in jail since April, no one is quite sure when he'll be a free man.
We all talk about time served and so on. That's something that happens at the end of the case if he succeeds. So he could be released anytime in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. That really remains to be seen.
Now the question is, what's next? Knight will take part in a year-long program to make him readjust to a normal lifestyle. The district attorney says the judge took into account the fact that despite his decades of stealing, Knight never physically hurt anyone.
This story began as a local urban legend in the woods of central Maine near North Pond. For nearly 3 decades, residents of the area whispered about a mysterious figure who lived deep in the forest, unseen and unheard, yet always present. The residents began to notice that food, clothing, and other supplies started to disappear from their cabins, sometimes without a trace. For years, the North Pond Hermit was just a figure of local lore, but unlike many urban legends, this one had an element of truth. The mystery of the Maine Hermit was finally solved in 2013 when Christopher Knight, a man who had lived in the woods for 27 years without human contact, was caught during a break-in at a summer camp. When Knight was just 20 years old, he walked into the woods and chose to disappear from society. For nearly 3 decades, he lived in a makeshift camp hidden deep in the forest, surviving by stealing food and supplies from nearby camps and homes. He became a master of evasion, moving silently through the woods at night, leaving no trace of his presence. The locals knew something or someone was out there, but Knight remained elusive and in a way almost mythical.
soon as he stepped outside the door, I just turned, game warden, on the ground, show me a hand, and he immediately just dropped right to the ground.
A recluse, Knight says he lived alone in the woods for more than 27 years. Authorities say he told them he's only talked to one other person in all that time.
He claims he hasn't had contact with another human being since the mid-1990s when he encountered somebody on a trail, and they just exchanged a common greeting, and that was about it.
Officials say he lived at this camouflage campsite in the woods, even in the dead of Maine's brutal winters.
It's just amazing to me that he could make it through Maine winters like that, living in a nylon tent.
Police say Knight targeted vacant campsites, stealing to survive.
I would say well over 1,000 burglaries. Everything that he stole was to survive: food, clothing, shelter.
Christopher Knight's arrest revealed the extent of his isolation. He had not spoken to another person for 27 years, with the one exception of a brief hello to a hiker he encountered in the 1990s. While he was out in the wilderness for 3 decades, he endured the harsh winters by layering stolen clothing and building a camp that was invisible from the outside. The legend of the Maine Hermit was true, and the reality was even more incredible than the myth among residents. After he was caught, Christopher Knight was ultimately charged with over 1,000 burglaries.
David, this entire story of sadistic homosexual slayings would almost appear to be fiction, scripted with the full intention of shocking readers over and over again. It's that hard to believe. So many lives involved, so many killed over such a long period of time, and all of it going undetected. But it's not fiction. It's very real. A deadly conspiracy now listed as one of the most horrifying crimes in this century. The victims were all boys in the early to mid-teens who allegedly had been lured into a death trap by this young man, 17-year-old Elmer Wayne Henley. It was Henley who unveiled this secret of mass killings and led police to the graves of the dead. Henley called the police to the home of Dean Corll. He said he killed that Pasadena resident. Henley said the 34-year-old Corll had talked about killing several young men and burying them in this boat storage in South Houston. Henley said he and 2 other young people were intended victims Wednesday morning. At that time, they had passed out at Corll's house after an all-night party.
This urban legend started in the 1970s when young men began to go missing without a trace. Between 1970 and 1973, Dean Corll, also known as the Candyman, was responsible for the kidnapping and murders of at least 28 young boys and men. Dean Corll, along with his 2 accomplices Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks, terrorized Houston, and the slayings became known as the Houston mass murders.
I woke up and he was clamping handcuffs on me. I was laying on my stomach. The other 2 were on their stomach and they were handcuffed and their feet were tied. I can't remember whether he tied my feet afterwards or they were tied when I woke up. I'd torture him if he'd let me go.
Was he gonna, would he want you to kill them then?
To begin with, he wanted to kill me. He was mad because I brought the chick over there. The chick wanted to run away from home and I was gonna travel with Dean. I thought it was safe. I didn't know no better.
Dean Corll got the name Candyman because he worked at his family's candy factory when he was younger and gave out free candy to the boys in the neighborhood. The victims ranged in age from 13 to 20 and became known as the Lost Boys. At the time, many believed police just brushed off the disappearances as runaways. With help from his young accomplices, many of the victims were often lured into the Candyman's home under false promises of fun. After appearing and acting friendly, the Candyman would torture and eventually kill the victims that entered his home. Candyman's murders soon came to light when Henley and Brooks led investigators to the locations where the bodies had been dumped. On August 8, 1973, police responded to a 911 call, where they found both Dean Corll and Elmer Wayne Henley, who allegedly confessed to fatally shooting the Candyman in self-defense. Both Henley and Brooks pleaded guilty to their roles in the murders from 1970 to 1973 and were sentenced to life in prison. In 2020, David Brooks died of complications from COVID-19 and Elmer Wayne Henley still remains in prison.